everybody. Thanks for having us. You want to introduce yourself, Gautier?
Thanks, Jay. Hi, everybody. I'm Gutiérrez Quiños. I'm one of the owners of Corvus Belli. Corvus Belli is a company from an exotic place called Península do Morrazo in Galicia, here in Spain. We design and produce metal and plastic resin miniatures for role-playing games, word games, and board games. We also have several games for to play with our miniatures. And 20 years ago, we were 5 guys in an annex of a garage selling a very small range of fantasy miniatures. And all our distributors and shops said to us, your miniatures are nice, but you will sell more if you have a game supporting them. So please realize in that moment, it was the moment of the Lord of the Rings movies, so every company, every miniature games company was releasing fantasy games, war games. So we decided to move from fantasy to science fiction, and we created Infinity. Infinity is a science fiction skirmish game with anime aesthetics, where small groups of special operations fulfill missions, circuit missions, playing on a board game with a scenery resembling cities, jungles, or whatever the player wants to use. Since the beginning, our intention was to create not just a war game, but create I call it an universe. At that moment, the word IP was not in the conversation, but I define it as a universe. The intention was to have a container, a sandbox, where we can place further products, all of them set in that universe. Some years later, Marvel came with their Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we said, hey, they're copying us. But right now, we have Infinity as a board game. Also, we have released 2 board games set in the Infinity universe. We have released 3 mangas, also 3 novels, and there are 3 more upcoming, and also a role-playing game. And suddenly, 5 years ago...
I guess that's where I come in. I just wanted to show some what the game looks like. It's a tabletop game. It's a lot of terrain. And of course, there's a lot of miniatures, so I wanted to show you guys what the miniatures look like. I'm going to cut to myself. Thank you, Gautier. So my name is Jay Oliva. I've been working in animation for almost 30 years now. I've been working in live action for about 14 years now. I have a studio called LEX OTIS, which is in Los Angeles. And we've been around for about 7 years. About 5 years ago, actually 6 years ago now, I contacted Corvus Belli because I'm a fan. I've always played the war games, and because I'm the CEO and owner of the studio, I have to find work. So I was thinking about, well, why don't I adapt something that I love? And I have a studio, and why don't I contact them? So I contacted customer service because I have no clue how to contact them in Spain. And I got in touch with one of the owners, Fernando, and I said, hey, I have a pitch for you. I'll fly out to Vigo. I've never been there, but I'll fly out there and I'll give you the pitch. And he's like, you want to come out here? I was like, sure, I want to come out. And so I went out, and Gautier here is the one who created the lore for Infinity. And so I spent about a week with him, and I told him, this is what I want to do. And of course, he graciously accepted what I liked, and we started a partnership and we developed the animated series. But I wanted to give you a little background on myself, just so for those of you who are thinking about adapting an IP, whether it's your own or somebody else's, I'll give you a little background on myself. So again, I started in 1995, 96. I started on Spider-Man on Fox. I've done everything from the Marvel films. I've directed. I did He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I did Justice League. I worked in preschool at Disney. I worked at Warner Brothers. I did Nickelodeon. I've done video games. I've worked for Blur. I've done Mortal Kombat. I've done a ton of stuff. About 14 years ago, I did Man of Steel with Zack Snyder. I did all of the DC stuff. I did Deadpool with Tim Miller. I worked on Dungeons and Dragons. I did Thor Ragnarok with Taika Waititi. So I have a lot of experience of taking an IP and adapting it into another medium or various versions of it. When I started my studio, one of the first projects that I worked on was Trece. It's on Netflix right now. It's an adaptation of a graphic novel from the Philippines. And so that was my first show. We then did Arc the Animated Series, which is an adaptation of a video game. It's a very popular video game. We did that during the pandemic. And then recently, it just came out a couple of weeks ago, Twilight of the Gods, out on Netflix. I was the creator, co-creator. My studio did the designs and everything, so that's just out. That's Twilight of the Gods. And so that brings us to Infinity Paradise Lost. And one of the things that I think you're probably thinking is, how do I adapt this? This is what the game board looks like, right? And there's one thing that I wanted to kind of talk about, which was I call the 9 rules of adaptations. At least this is how I do it. It's a very involved way. As you know, a lot of the studios are adapting video games and books and everything under the sun. Most of the time they get it wrong, because a lot of times the people who are involved with it don't understand the IP. And the rule number 1 is this. This is my cheesy keynote thing, but be a fan, okay? Even if you don't really know the IP very well, just be a fan. Like, understand why people like it. And that's really the most important rule for adapting, is like, be a fan. If you're not a fan, don't adapt it, because the thing is, the audience who are fans, they can tell if you are making it up. They can tell if you're trying to, like, pull the wool over their eyes and fake them out. Number 2, and this is the other important one, it's research, research, research. So for Infinity, what I did is let me go back. This was the rule book when I first started. It's the N3 rule book. It has the lore, and I believe it had the rules at the time. And so what I did is I went through the lore book, and I read it, and I was telling Gautier when I met him, I was like, it reads like a really, really dense history book, because there's everything in there. But the idea is that I tried to find somewhere in the timeline that I could kind of mine and find a moment that would be good. And so what happened was I found this moment in the stories where, find the drama. You want to find a moment in the timeline, just like with George Lucas and Star Wars, right? George didn't start in episode 1, he started with episode 4 because that was the most producible, and it felt like a good place to introduce new audiences into, and that's where he started. And with Gautier's storyline, there was a moment in the timeline that I thought would be a perfect moment. And I think at the time it might have been 30 years before the current timeline that's in the game. And it was a little moment where the humans haven't met the aliens, and it was right when first contact was going to happen. So I thought, this is an interesting moment to tell stories in, because it's already been established in the lore and the timeline. The fans know when it happened, but it hasn't been dramatized yet. So I wanted to tell a story that the fans knew what was going to happen, but didn't know how it happened. Number 3, and this is the important one, is whose point of view are you going to show, right? Now, in the game, there are multiple factions. I'm being attacked by flies here. There are multiple factions, and they all represent futuristic versions of countries in the world today, but like, what was it, 200 years from now?
175.
Okay, 175, yes. And so what I did is I looked through the model range, and the army that I played, I was originally planning to use as the main character, but I saw this character here, this model, and I thought to myself, this was a really interesting character because it's not designed like the rest of the model line. The rest of the model line is like very slick, very futuristic, very like sexy. And this one I liked because it was very like frumpy, and like it just screamed to me, what is the story of this character, right? And so I thought, I'm going to make a story about this character, right? And also the fact that because it's a medic, it's not what you'd expect for an action kind of show. So I thought, well, why don't I adapt it? So what I did is what you're seeing on the left here is the original design from Corvus, and then this is kind of my team's kind of adaptation of it. And this eventually evolved to one of our protagonists, Danya, right? So this is just her, just without the helmet and a little bit of the design. So we came up with this design, and then another character that I really thought was interesting was this assassin Farzan. And this character, so this is the miniature. This is the design that Corvus provided us. That I have the miniature at home, and then this is our adaptation of it. We did this, and the idea is that it kind of satisfies what I call the squint test, where if you look at it and then you see the original version, you see the new version. It looks similar, but it doesn't have to be exact. Because again, when you're adapting something that is from a miniature or a comic book or something that isn't tangible and you're turning it into a live action or an animation or in CG where everything has to be built, you have to kind of find shapes that sometimes in the artwork is just kind of cheated, but then you have to figure out, okay, what is the materials, especially since this is a CG show. So rule number 4 is know your audience. And the idea is that you are you're adapting something for fans by fans. Because remember, the fans will know if you are faking it. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to be a fan to begin with. It just you have to understand why people like it. And then hopefully you like it yourself, right? And the way I look at it is this, right? You have the people who know everything about the IP, and then you have something that they don't know anything about the IP. And what you have to do is you have to find a moment in the story where you can introduce the character, introduce the audience to this world. You don't want to throw them into, where the lore masters are, right, who know everything because they're going to be lost in the weeds. You want to kind of find a happy medium between the two. And what I usually like to do is what I call the Alice in Wonderland treatment, where you have a character who lives in the world, who understands it, but is foreign to what he or she is going to be introduced to. And so the idea is that this is the human sphere. So this is where the universe takes place. It's a very big, vast place, many planets, many systems. And the idea is that I would start the story here and I would move to there through the course of the season, the first season. And that's how I would go about introducing the audience through the eyes of Danya, our main character, to this new world. Right? Because remember, she knows the world that she lives in, but she's never been outside of that. So we use her as a vehicle, and that's the best way to kind of introduce the audience to a universe that is very unfamiliar. It's very much like Luke Skywalker, right? Luke Skywalker was on Tatooine. He then, is revealed the rest of the universe, and we see the rest of the Star Wars universe through his eyes. So, rule number 5 is choose an art style that fits the IP. Now, there are different ways you can adapt it, especially if you're going to do either 2D hand-drawn or you can do 3D. Of course, 3D costs a bit more. There's a lot more involved into that process. But the previous kind of presenters, you can take some of those 3D assets and then translate it into a game, right? There's a lot of ways of doing it. A lot of times studios, though, when you pitch to the studios, they won't really care about that. It's good if you are producing it yourself, because then you can tell your investors that you can double dip in terms of this investment. But for the studios like Netflix and Amazon, they don't care about that. They will want to buy the rights for everything, but that's where you have to find that balance, especially if you're pitching to them. So when it came to the art style, there's this particular cover from one of the mangas that Corvus Belli produced, which I thought was great. And there was actually a painted version of it. And when I saw this, that's when I knew that was the style that I was trying to go for in terms of how the CG was going to look. So one of the first kind of initial concepts we came up with was this. It was a early just rendering. We were just putting an environment, a character, and just seeing, does that look right? And that eventually evolved into this. And this then is how the world looked, and we kind of kept iterating, and this is kind of what the final version of it. So I'm going to show you guys the kind of opening of the first episode, and then you can see. Here we go.
Encountering one means certain death.
A faction is attempting to acquire silk for production of nitrocaine. Obtain visual confirmation for the exchange. Then, track the criminals.
Object sighted. Awaiting payment. Silk is Allah's gift to mankind.
Such threats must be eliminated.
Are you hungry?
How we adapted it. So one of the things that's important about adaptations is a lot of times people just focus on the characters, right? They'll have some great character backstories, some great designs, and then you see the backgrounds, and the backgrounds look like they were, they're just stock backgrounds, they're just typical. And what you also have to understand is that when you're doing an adaptation, especially from a world that is very unique, right, like a sci-fi world, like a Blade Runner or Star Wars, is that the setting, you have to make the setting as a character. You have to design it in a way that the audience, whether they're new or old, the old audience, who knows it, they are going to remember the artwork that's in the books or in the original, that they know it from, whether it's comic book or novel or whatever. And then for new audiences, you have to be able to take that, because there's something really interesting. So these were the initial concepts that we got from Corvus Belli for the Borak area, right, the area that you saw. And so my team and I, we iterated off of that into what you see here, as well as here. And one of the rules that I haven't mentioned here is the fact that always talk to your IP holder. So I was always in direct contact with Gautier and Corvus Belli, always showing them, once I had a design and a story moment that I was happy with, I would bring it to him and say, what do you think? A lot of times they would say, this is great, but most of the time they did have little notes here and there, which was great because, again, they know it better than I do. But I tried to capture what I loved about playing the game, and also what I loved about the artwork that I had. Now, these are some others that you saw, some of these shots, and then now let's get to rule number 7. Now this is interesting, where's it? Here we go. Make the story feel like you were playing the game, all right? So whether you're doing, I don't know, Battleship or Chutes and Ladders, or I don't know what games you guys play in Europe here, but we had some, like Monopoly, right? Like, how do you take Monopoly and you adapt that? So when I was thinking about the show as a series, I wanted to try to capture the feel of playing the game. Now, the game isn't a typical, like, okay, I'm gonna, try to kill you, almost like chess, like you go, I go, and it's chess. There's a lot of objectives that you have to do within the actual game that you have to do before the other player does. And so and that lends itself already to a cinematic experience, because that's technically like a Mission Impossible movie, right? Where they have to hack this and get that and get away. And it was just a matter of just translating that in a way that for people who play the game, they'll recognize the objectives, but for audiences who've never played it, they just think of this is just what has to happen in terms of the characters going from A, B, and C. So we did is we created taking the ideas of the original sci-fi universe, and so here's the orbital elevator, and we kind of really gave it that kind of cinematic treatment, as if like, okay, if this is a real place, what would it look like? And then I picked iconic kind of imagery that you would have seen from movies and books, and I put it into the what you see in the environment. And then so this is some of the shots. What's interesting is that one of the locations looks like I wanted to make sure it looked like a table that you would play on, where it had a lot of structures, a lot of areas for the miniatures to hide behind, and we designed this kind of abandoned mining facility, to kind of be this big kind of set piece location, as you see here. And then of course, in the game there are hackers, so we have hacking that we show. And then let's do rule number 8. Don't forget the human element. So and this is really important, because when you're pitching your idea to Netflix or Amazon, whoever, they don't care about the world building. You could have Dune or something, they don't care. What they care about is the character moments. What is the character arc? How is the character growing? How do they change? And is that story something that people can empathize with and understand? Because if it's too niche, if it's something that only a handful of people can kind of relate to, they're not going to pick it up. Because remember, these episodes, they cost millions of dollars. So if you're asking a studio like Netflix or whoever to invest in it, you have to understand how are they going to get their return back? Because again, as artists, we always well, we don't care, we just want to create something cool, right? But the reality is that it costs money for all of that. Because remember, we have to, again, I own my studio, so I have to pay my artists. And those artists that I then have to, they have bills, and I have to pay overhead, and there's a lot of things. And then I have to then sell the show for a profit, so that way I can keep making shows, or else I close the doors, right? And then so Netflix or Amazon, they have to buy it at a price that fits into their budget. So that's why you don't want to overspend when it comes to designing your show. Understand where the market is in terms of what you're pitching. So let's say you're developing a show for primetime. Look at what the budgets for a primetime show is, and then design it to that. If you're trying to do something for preschool, look at the budgets of what is typically for that and design it for that. Because you don't, if you don't want to make a show that is normally going to sell for, let's say, $10 million, but you make it for 15, because that's not going to happen. So for this case, you have to understand the human element that you are going to pitch to the audience. Basically to the streamer who will then pick it up, because they want a story that is, that will make. I always like to tell a story that makes people cry and fall in love. So you want to really focus on what is the arc of your characters, right? And if one of our main characters, Danya, you see her transformation over the series. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that there's this quote by Robert McKee, right? He's a screenwriter, and is your characters must change, but the change must come from them. So as your story progresses, as they change, you have to add pressure to them in order for them to change, or else the audience will be like, I don't understand why this character made the decision. Why did this character fall in love? Or why did this character do this? Because as soon as you lose the audience, because I'm sure you've watched a movie or seen a series where you don't understand why a character did something, right? Like Daenerys from Game of Thrones at the end. You're like, why did she do that? It didn't really seem in character with her. You lose the audience. So you have to really make sure that if you are going to do something like that, you've set it up. You've set up along the way. You've put little moments in your story that will apply this kind of pressure in order for your characters to overcome it. And then number 9, and this is the last one, is be passionate about your project. When you're pitching, you have to be energetic, you have to be excited, you have to be like, you have to basically be so excited about it, because I've seen pitches where they're like, all right, so here's the drawings, this is my characters, it's a cool story, can I have some money, right? I've seen that, right? And it always falls flat. So you have to go in, you have to be, of course, professional, but then you have to be excited. Like you have to, sometimes people will go into voices. I don't do the voices, but I will kind of be very animated with when I'm pitching it, because then it shows the, potential buyers that, the showrunners or the people behind it are super excited about this project, and you're pitching that enthusiasm, because if you're excited about it, then hopefully they will be excited, and also the audience will be excited. So you have to have passion about it, because again, if you don't have that, don't develop it, right? Because you're just wasting your time, because you're gonna waste all that time and you're not gonna be able to sell it, and then all that money's gone to waste. So I'm gonna show you the trailer. This is, we did 8 episodes as a first season. We produced, right now we're in talks with different studios of distribution, and we're hoping to either have this as a series or make it into a feature film. But, it looks good. Anyways, let me show this to you guys.
They say that whoever controls Silk controls the galaxy. But those who would pervert this gift are threats to humanity's evolution. Such threats must be eliminated.
Who the hell are you?
I have a proposal. What if you were meant for more than a life addicted to Silk?
Maybe I like where I am.
Maybe you should think about giving your life to a cause that really matters. If you devote yourself to a path, you'll become greater than your pain. But only you can take the first step.
Kasia, do we have time for questions or anything, or we don't? I got like 6 minutes. 6 minutes? Anybody has any questions? Anything? Yes.
Hi, first of all, I love the presentation, so good. I wanted to ask, in which software did you work to produce it?
What was that?
Software, which software did you use to
Oh, it's
produce
software,
it?
okay. It's Maya. It's Maya with RenderMan.
All is Maya?
Yeah, it's all Maya. Yeah, we did do some post work on it for color correction and everything, but it's all animated on Maya.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's really well done. Anything else? You guys have any other questions? in terms of, like I said, I've pitched stuff, I've sold stuff, I've produced stuff, anything? Okay, well, that's good. Well, thank you, everybody. We loved being here and presenting it to you guys. And again, I'm so glad I could take a Spanish property and adapt it for, for the world. And it makes me very happy to be able to show this. And I think they are happy with the way it turned out, right?
Yeah. Muchas gracias por estar aquí y prestarnos un poquito de atención. Y bueno, nada, como ya digo, él es la estrella. Yo solo soy un señor que hace muñequitos para jugar con ellos, nada más. Pero eso es un poquito lo importante. That's the important thing of this is be able to be. If I look back 20 years ago, probably we were discussing about creating an IP, creating a universe. We discussed about creating board games, have mangas, because we are very passionate about comic books and novels. And at some moment, we also talk about an animated series, but that's something you talk about, but you never think about it. And 20 years later, we are here. We are still. At that moment, we were young and silly. Right now, we are not young, but we were still silly. So we are loyal to ourselves. But so for us, it's really incredible to be right now seeing our models, tiny models coming alive, and be able to share to the big market and to the rest of the world. Even considering that we release we sell our models in the whole world, but after all, miniature market is very small. It's a niche market. It's not so big as video games, for example. So every time we say we have a games company, we say video games. No. Tabletop games. But as I said, we are very grateful to EA for approach to us with this project. That's something we never expect, and something we think we have worked all along during 12 years, taking care of our IP and spending a lot of hours, because as Jay said, we are very passionate about that. And that's something you never forget. Keep the passion. Keep always the passion, because you will spend a lot of hours in your project. Your project needs that hours, and if you are not passionate, you will suffer. If you are passionate, you will suffer also, but you don't think too much about that. So thanks again for being here and sharing this with us.